Today on the Lazy RPG Talk Show, we're going to look at a bundle of holding for Dungeon Crawl Classics module. Hit Point Press goes pay what you want for Humblewood and Heckna. I released Whitesparrow and the Nightblade into the Creative Commons. We're going to talk. I released Whitesparrow and Nightblade into the Creative Commons. Goodman Games has a new Advanced Advantage 5e system they're working on. I'm going to do a spotlight on the Monster Overhaul, an awesome monster book. I have some thoughts about Foundry that I wanted to talk about. And we're going to look at the 3-2-1 quest model, a quest model that I really think is a valuable and powerful tool for running quests in our games. And we're going to cover more questions from the December 2024 Patreon Q&A, all today on the Lazy RPG Talk Show. I'm Mike Shea, your pal from Sly Flourish, here to talk about all things in tabletop role-playing games. The Lazy RPG Talk Show is brought to you by the patrons of Sly Flourish. Patrons get access to all kinds of tips, tricks, tools, an exclusive podcast, all kinds of stuff that you get for becoming a patron of Sly Flourish. You also get to join the awesome Lazy DM community over on Discord, and you help me put on shows like this. To the patrons of Sly Flourish, thank you so much for your outstanding support. As I have discussed in many shows previously, some of the best deals you will ever find in tabletop role-playing game products are humble bundles and bundles of holding. There is currently a bundle of holding going on for a bunch of older Dungeon Crawl Classics modules. These modules are written in the 2003 to 2007 timeframe. They are not for Dungeon Crawl Classics directly. They're actually for, I think, like the third or 3.5 edition. So these are older modules that you will probably have to do some kind of conversion on. Yeah, they were built for Dungeons and Dragons 3rd and 3.5. They call them 3.x, whatever. But there are tons of them. You get 50 DCC adventures for not a lot of money. There is currently a threshold. The way that these work is there's a threshold. When you beat the threshold, you get all of the adventures, $40 for 50 adventures, $20 for 29 adventures. So if you're looking for a great big pile of adventures to run for your game, including a couple of source books. There are a couple of really cool source books that are included in here as well. I picked it up. I poked through it. There is a whole lot of interesting source books that are here. Oh, I should mention, I was given a free copy of this bundle for this promotion. So something to keep in mind when you're looking at this. But I did open it up and I did look at some of these, and there are some really amazing adventures in here. You're going to have to do some conversions of stat blocks and stuff like that, but I don't really think that converting from older systems to newer systems is actually that difficult. In fact, really the only bad part is when some of them have like whole stat blocks in there and you're like, here's a whole page of stuff I'm not going to use because I don't use that stat block. So really, but if you're looking for a big pile of adventures to kind of harvest and twist and turn and use for your own purposes and remix or do whatever you want. If you just want a big pile of adventures, you can get $572 worth of adventures for $41. Or you can get just a small handful of them for $20 if you want to go for the smaller package. But again, outstanding bundle of holding, a great deal, always a great deal if you want to fill a library full of stuff. This is how you can do it with Dungeon Crawl Classics. Hit Point Press. I forget where I first heard about it. I think I heard about it on Discord, but I think somebody else heard about it from Rascal News, that over the Humblewood from Hit Point Press, the Humblewood campaign setting now has a pay what you want price. So the value of this, Humblewood is kind of an interesting sort of an animal-based anthropomorphic fantasy setting for your 5e game. And they've set it up as a pay what you want. So you can decide how much you want to pay to download this 200-page campaign setting. Probably my recommendation would be to throw like $5 their way and download it. And if you like it and you use it, go ahead and pay the $30. If it's just something that you would not really use, but you want to take a look at it, at least give them $5 so that they get something for the value of the work, and you can always kind of use it. But if you find you're actually using the material from it, then I would pay the full rate. So, but it's a good way to kind of preview the entire thing, which I think is really valuable. And so that is both for the Humblewood campaign setting, which is really cool, and a adventure called the Heckna campaign setting. Also pay what you want. I don't know how long it's going to be pay what you want. I don't know how long they plan to do this. But I would what I would suggest is if it's not the kind of thing you would have bought for $30, but you'd like to check it out, then throw $5 their way, pick it up, take a look at it. And if you like it, and you plan on using it, then I would pay the $30 because it's almost these products. If you're using them at your table, $30 is not a lot. Like for the hours of entertainment that you get from these, I really think that those are not unreasonable prices. But if it's the kind of thing where like, you might read it or scan through it and you're not really going to keep it, the idea that you pay $30 for it is probably quite a bit. But $5 gives them something for the effort that they put through, even if you're only taking a look at it for a preview. Anyway, that's how I think about it. I think that's an okay way to think about it. I think it gives them the benefit. They did make it pay what you want, so you're not hosing them. But I do think that if you use it, you should probably pay more than like the $5 for the preview. And I think you should give them something, even if you're just downloading it to check it out. The idea of like doing it for $0, I think is not great either. Like they put a lot of effort into these, they put a lot of art into these, and I think it's worth throwing some money their way. Anyway, so that is Heckna. The Heckna campaign setting, 5e adventure for levels 1 to 10, looks kind of similar to a While Beyond the Witchlight style, but I haven't really dug into it that deeply myself. But I sure did dig into that price because that's a really reasonable price. So you can check out those. You can find links to those in the show notes. You can also go to the Hit Point Press website and look for the Humblewood campaign setting and Heckna. One thing I've wanted to do, so some people know about this, some people don't, but a while back, I released a whole lot of the material from Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master, the Lazy DM's Workbook, and the Lazy DM's Companion into the Creative Commons. Scott Gray and Teos and Abadia and I also released a good chunk of Forge of Foes into the Creative Commons. We have two different Creative Commons, two different resource documents, the Lazy GM's resource document, which you can find off of slyflourish.com. You can also find it linked in the show notes. And the Lazy GM's 5e Monster Builder resource document, which includes the stuff that Scott and Teos and I released as part of Forge of Foes. And one thing is like, we have a lot of mechanic stuff in there. There's a lot of like GM advice things. There's a lot of random tables. There's a lot of stuff that's valuable for any fantasy RPG, but also valuable for 5e in particular. But one thing that we don't see a lot in open licenses is like setting material. So one of the things I want to do over the long term is release as much as I can into the Creative Commons, reasonably can into the Creative Commons. I get a big charge out of giving things away. But you also, like, once you give it away, you can never take it back. So I always want to be careful about what I release, because if I do it, I do it. It's done, right? It can never get it back again. And if you just, oh, wow, I really wish I hadn't given that away for whatever reason, either somebody grabbed it and ran with it in a direction you didn't want to go or whatever, I always want to be careful with it. But Fantastic Adventures, my book of 10 adventures, has been around for a long time. And I said, I really would like to offer to other publishers the Fantastic Adventures, the very small setting that I had created for Fantastic Adventures, which is a setting known as Whitesparrow. Whitesparrow is a small town. And all of the adventures of Fantastic Adventures kind of start in and around this small town of Whitesparrow. And so I went through and I took that text out and I edited it up. I didn't edit the text very much, but I added like an intro and released that as part of the Lazy GM resource document. So now the village of Whitesparrow, including all the NPCs that are there, all the locations that are there, the flavor text, kind of adventure hooks that can take place. Each one of these has sort of small adventure hooks. That all of that has been released into the Creative Commons. So now you can build your own adventures. You can build your own adventures off of Whitesparrow, but you can also include the text from Whitesparrow in your product if you're doing something like that. If you want to take the setting and expand it, if you wanted to have like a hub for other adventures, you now have that. Publishers now have that available to them. I also released the first adventure from Fantastic Adventures, which I had been giving away for free anyway. And I released all of the text of that in the Creative Commons as well. And the intention here is if you are a publisher, maybe you're making a new system, maybe you're making some kind of new product, and you wanted to include a starter adventure. Nightblade is a starter adventure that you can include. It's been well play tested. It's been well edited. It's gone through everything. It's been run hundreds and hundreds of times. And you can throw the Nightblade into any kind of product. So that is released under Creative Commons as well. Again, the NPCs that are there, secrets and clues that are there, ability to customize the adventure. We made a new map. Chris Wilson, a patron of Sly Flourish, made a map and gave me permission and gave Blanket permission that the map is released under a Creative Commons 0 license, which means you can use this map in your product as well. So it is a really, that way you can actually use the map itself and not have to worry about any kind of, it's available for commercial use and everything else. So that is something that I did this past week, and I'm very excited about. So now this Lazy GM resource, I threw it in the Lazy GM resource document. So it's part of the Lazy GM resource document, which has all kinds of other stuff. This is, rather than kind of having separate Creative Commons documents for everything, I want to just make one big document that has all this stuff in it. That's like everything I'm releasing in one file. I want to do Grendelroot stuff too. I would really love to release some Grendel Root stuff, but I need to take a harder look at that because it would be a lot more stuff. And I don't know if I'm going to build off of it. So I want to be kind of careful about what I release. But I really like it. And so the starter, we now have Whitesparrow is now available in the Creative Commons. Goodman Games, along with announcing some other things, has discussed the fact that they are working on a new 5e core variant that they are referring to as Advanced Advantage. They are going to have a new playtest for a massive 5e 400-page adventure called Terror from the Underdeep. And as part of that, they are going to have the first playtest packet for an Advanced Advantage system, they're calling it. That's what their name for it currently is Advanced Advantage, and it is their house version of 5e. Obviously, we're seeing more publishers do this. Level Up Advanced, or EN World Publishing has Level Up Advanced 5e. Kobold Press has Tales of the Valiant. So we're seeing more 5e house systems for bigger publishers. Goodman Games is a very big publisher in tabletop role-playing games, and they're going to have their own version of 5e, which I think is really cool, because then, they can make their take on it, and like the things that are important to them and their style of play that they can put into this. The only thing they've talked about from a mechanic standpoint is that they want to use the crazy DCC dice instead of advantage. So instead of like rolling 2d20 and taking the better, the advantage system that they're going to have is you step up the die. So you go from a d20 to a d24 or whatever, which makes sense for them because they love their crazy dice. I'm not as crazy about the crazy dice as other people are, but I know people really love the crazy dice. So that's fine. But I'm always interested to see different publishers and their take on 5e. One of the things I think makes 5e incredibly, so there's a bunch of things that makes 5e really, really incredible. One is, of course, that it is now an open platform. That 5e is an open system and an open platform for any publisher to be able to build 5e compatible products that aren't just compatible with the 2014 and 2024 versions of D&D, but are also compatible with all of the other 5e variants that other people are doing. You can take your Monster Vault monster book from Tales of the Valiant and use those monsters in your Level Up Advanced 5e game. You can take the concept of supply and other aspects from Level Up Advanced 5e and drop them into your Tales of the Valiant game. The more publishers that are publishing material for 5e, even if they're taking a very different slice on it, that stuff is often compatible with the other versions of 5e that you have. And I think that makes that whole ecosystem really fun and really interesting. So I'm very interested to see other groups that are, taking 5e and moving it into new realms that it hasn't moved before, and yet still maintaining various levels of compatibility with the other material that people have. Another example would be the Lord of the Rings 5e version, right? So if you have like the Free League version of the Lord of the Rings for 5e, you can use this. This is sort of a 5e wrapper. It is not a complete version of 5e. It still expects that you have the rules for playing 5e somewhere, but it changes species, it changes classes, it changes backgrounds, it changes a lot of the game to fit Lord of the Rings. But monsters, 5e monsters from any other source can still work as templates or as monsters or as something else. Spells can still work, lots of different things. Adventures can still work, and you can run adventures written for other systems like Tales of the Valiant with your Lord of the Rings game by reskinning things. It makes the whole 5e ecosystem really interesting. And the more publishers that are building their own sort of house rule style of 5e, like Goodman Games is doing with Advanced, the more resources we get that expands the whole of 5e into new and interesting ways. A really simple one is the idea that I like the luck system from Tales of the Valiant so much that I don't care what other 5e system I'm building. I've been throwing luck in there instead of inspiration. It's a direct drag and drop replacement, and it works really, really well. And that's just the expansion of the system. So that's really interesting. So I'm very interested to see Goodman Games. I think it's going to be a while, right? I think they haven't announced everything that's coming in 2025. So it's going to be a while before we see a full system of this. Obviously, we'll see playtests and everything else as we go. But it'll be fascinating to watch. I'm really interested in that. When a couple weeks ago, I did a big topic on the books that people used often at the table. I was very interested in this idea of like, okay, we're buying lots of RPG books, but which ones are we really using? Which ones are the ones that we come back to repeatedly at our table? And I got a bunch of different ones, and I did sort of a discussion of some of the ones that had come out pretty often. But one book came up that I hadn't really paid much attention to. My friend Teos Abadia talked about it. I remember having conversations with him where he had heard it was really good and picked it up when he was at Gamehole Con, and he's like, it is really good. And that's a book called The Monster Overhaul. So I went ahead and picked up the Monster Overhaul as well. You can pick it up at Indie Press Revolution. You get both the PDF and print version of the book. I recommend getting the print version of the book. I got the print. I didn't bring it down here. I left it upstairs. I got the print version of the book, and I'm very glad to have the print version of the book. So the Monster Overhaul is what I would refer to as an old school style. It takes a very different look at how to give tools to a game master for preparing and running monsters for your game. And the number one thing that grabbed my attention with this book is how well this book can work side by side with Forge of Foes. So Scott Gray and Teos Abadia and I wrote a book called Forge of Foes. Forge of Foes is a book to help you build, reskin, and run monsters in your 5e games. It's generally designed for 5e. Not every article in there is 5e specific, but all of the mechanically sort of bits are built around 5e. But what we don't do is give you all the monsters themselves. It isn't a monster manual. The expectation was lots of other publishers are making books that have lots of different monsters in them. This is a book for you to help you improvise your monsters or build monsters or think about how you run your monsters during your game. How do you run boss fights? How do you run fights against hordes of guys? You know, all sorts of different topics that we cover in Forge of Foes. And probably the biggest, most recognizable piece of Forge of Foes is like a big description of the different stats for monsters at different challenge ratings, and then a big pile of different powers that you can apply to those monsters to kind of customize those monsters. What's really neat is the Monster Overhaul almost does the opposite of that. The Monster Overhaul has a whole list of different monsters and lots of different ways that those monsters fit into the story of the game that is very light on the mechanics, which means you can take all the mechanically bits from Forge of Foes and apply it to all the story bits of the monsters from the Monster Overhaul, and you have this incredibly rich way of combining these two books together to come up with a whole new way to do monsters. What's particularly interesting about the way the Monster Overhaul, so Monster Overhaul is heavily based on random tables. Every monster has at least some kind of random table associated with it that's unique for that monster. Some way to make every one of the monsters in here that you find listed in this book unique. Also, pretty much everything in it is a random table, including the lists of the monsters themselves. So you have the Monster Overhaul, the monsters are all broken out by these types: people, dungeons, dragons, thinking beasts, heraldic beasts, primeval, elemental, divine, dark and malign, a wizard did it, spring, summer, fall, winter, hostile forests, hot plains, mysterious mountains, stormy seas, strange water, and science fiction. That list itself is a random list. It's 20 different categories, and you can literally roll to say, what kind of monster am I going to have today? Then when you dig into them, you have each one of those lists has a D10 of the monsters that are there. So let's do it. Let's do one right now. Let's do a fun one. I got some dice here. I got my new Runehammer dice. These are like really nice, fun, big, table usable, readable dice. I'm going to try them out in my game today. So I'm going to roll a 20. I rolled a 8. So 8 is divine. And then I roll a D10 and I got a 1. Angel. So it goes straight to Angel on page 139. And the Angel, you have kind of the typical description. The stats it does have are sort of your old school style stats. This would probably fit well in your old school Essentials games, but again, it has little stats, but it doesn't take up a lot. And you could easily replace these stats with 5e based stats and be fine, but still use the random tables that it's got. So the examples, random tables that it has, it's got a bunch of them. See all the different, the random tables that it has for the Angel include divine messages, commands, what's this table? The virtues and judgment, variants of angels, angelic treasures, things that they judge you on. And then they have like a D100 for names, and then generic cosmology. So a whole description. So the Angel, I picked the right one. 4 pages worth of Angel random lists to kind of give you an idea about what sort of thing you might find from this Angel. For example, we'll do some treasure. I found a gem of true seeing. Could be an item that the Angel has. An Angel variant could be glyph orbited smoke and obsidian shards. Is it? What kind of angel? It's a D8. The virtues and judgment. 4, justice. Judges you on theft, murder, and treason. And its questions it asks are, what are your crimes? What blood is on your hands? Have you broken the natural order of this world? So, and then we have a D100 for like the names of the angels. And we have an 18. 18 is Minathon, the emblem of compassion. So every monster, not everyone has 4 pages. Some of them are 1 column on a page with some random stuff. Like if you go to the crocodile section doesn't have, pages and pages of stuff. But many of the monsters have at least a page. Some of them have half of a page. There's even like a demigod one and domains. The whole book is packed like this. The whole book has just tons of random tables for every kind of monster you can imagine. A really fun way. Here are examples of the, kind of monsters. The Gru, wow, I didn't realize it. The Gru seems to be one of the only monsters I've seen that doesn't have a random list associated with it. But almost everyone does. Even the Firebat, right? The little Firebat has a D10 Firebat variance. I rolled an 8. Explodes on death, 5-foot radius, and does damage. And another Firebat variant, that's a D8. 3 is Sizzle Puff, could be the name of the Firebat. And the elemental blend is 8, water and air. A Firebat that's got, in that case, it wouldn't be a Firebat, it'd be a water and air bat. Steam, or that wouldn't be steam. What would water and air? Ice? Water and air would be an ice bat. Neat stuff. Elemental tyrants. Here's a page on elemental tyrants. Really fun stuff. And just, like this is the kind of thing, this is the sort of book where you can build entire adventures around some of the roles that you have for the monsters that you have here. But man, just packed with random tables. And the random tables are all, so one of the things I always kind of consider when I'm looking at random tables are like, what's the resolution of the random table? Is this random table something that's so minuscule that rolling on it is taking a lot of time and not offering a lot of value? Or is it so large that it really doesn't tell you anything? I need to have a random table that gives me something I can hang on to and use that's big enough and important enough that it's worth bringing to the table. This one seems to really hit that. If you want to, if you have troglodytes, I had a whole adventure full of troglodytes. It would have been really interesting to roll on the troglodyte table and say, like, what about these troglodytes? They're compressed and shuffling with a blue skin, long pale hair, and 5 jointed fingers. Ooh, that's creepy. What kind of treasure do they have? 3, a divining rod that points to the nearest water source. Their origins are divinely appointed successor species cast out for unspecified crimes. They were thrown out. These were once blessed creatures that were thrown out. And what are these troglodytes doing? 8 is locked in a nasty leadership dispute. I can run with that, right? That's I got a whole thing. Really, really cool. So I enjoyed this book a lot. I have it upstairs. I plan to use it in my game. People that own it have talked about how they've been using it in their games directly. And it just brings so much interesting context to so many different monsters that I think it's an absolutely outstanding book, and I highly recommend it. So that is The Monster Overhaul by Skirples. It is available on Indie Press Revolution. You can pick that up over on Indie Press Revolution. I will put a link down into the show notes. You can pick up both the PDF and hardcover version of the book, which I recommend, and I think it is really, really cool. So check that out. So one of my fun little exercises over the holiday break, I kind of had a break. It's kind of a break, right? City of Arches was released to backers, which is awesome. And I didn't really want to pick up something else. I did have a freelance assignment for a company that I worked on over this time, but I also had some downtime. And I decided, what I want to do with my downtime is I'd like to learn 2 things. There's 2 things I want to learn. 1, I wanted to set up a Raspberry Pi. I wanted to set up my own little home Raspberry Pi server. And 2, I wanted to learn how to use Docker. Docker is a technology that lets you run compartmentalized applications on a home server like a Raspberry Pi. And my practical uses for this were 3. 1, I wanted to run a ad blocking thing called Pi-hole, which a friend of mine had been recommending. 2, I wanted to run my own home music server using a server called Jellyfin, so I can host my own music in my house. And 3, I wanted to host my own local version of Foundry. That gets us to the topic, which is Foundry. And I did. I succeeded in this. I kind of learned Docker. I learned it enough to type out commands that I read on the internet. And I got Foundry up and running. And I have had a license for Foundry. I've used Foundry a little bit. I've never really run a game in Foundry. I have friends who have run games in Foundry, but I just haven't used it myself. But I really like Foundry for I guess it's like 2 major reasons, maybe even a handful of other reasons. One is you buy it once and you own it. So in this world of centralized software and centralized services that has now happened, has grown a lot in the tabletop role-playing game space, it's rare to find things where you buy the software, you download it to your local machine, and you run it, and it's yours. And as long as you have that license key and as long as you maintain that software, you own it forever. And that's Foundry's model. They do not sell you a service. They sell you software. You buy the software and you run it. And that is a rare thing these days. It meant that the same license that I had for using it on my Mac, I was able to take that license and that software, install the software over my Raspberry Pi, use the license, and now I've got Foundry up and running on my Raspberry Pi. Very cool. In a Docker, right? A little self-contained Docker. It also means that the modules and stuff like that you either download, many of which are free. That's the other major thing about Foundry is it's a very extensible piece of software. It's got lots of ways, lots of different modules that you can download from other creators, very open software. So you can do a full UI overlap. There's functions like fancy dice. There's a whole bunch of different sort of modules that you can include in your Foundry installation that do different things that you want to do for your game. Some of it is improvements for the interface of running the game. Some of it is like new tools to make the game more fun. Some of it is like other tools for like exporting or importing data, things like that. So its extensibility is really good too. Clearly, the makers of Foundry believe heavily in the extensibility of it, and it has a lot of that extensibility. And 3 is there are a lot of commercial RPG systems that are available on it, including D&D 2024. One of the really good things that Wizards of the Coast did last year is they released D&D 2024 on Foundry. What that means is you can buy, and I did. I did not receive a review copy for this. I went and spent my hard-earned cash myself to buy both the Player's Handbook and the Dungeon Master's Guide for D&D 2024 so I could see what they were like on Foundry. And I did. I bought them and I downloaded them to Foundry, and they installed on my Foundry instance, and they are treated as a module itself. I'll load it up here and we can take a look at it. So this is my local Foundry installation. It's sitting over there in my Raspberry Pi, which is like 6 feet over. And in this one, I have included the Dungeon Master's Guide and the Player's Handbook for 5e. So I actually kind of like this compendium browser where I can go in here and I can look at the fighter and I can see kind of the fighter information that is here. You can look up spells if I want to. Let's see, where's my spells? I can go to spells, I can type fireball, and I can see the fireball and I can click it and I can see all the stats for a fireball. So obviously the real way you're supposed to use this with Foundry is you're supposed to run it as a virtual tabletop where you have characters, people can build their characters in it. You can build a character with your Player's Handbook information, and you can then run a game with maps and tokens and everything else. That's what Foundry is designed for. I'm actually kind of interested in using it as a local compendium of 5e stuff. So my ability to kind of go and look up information about Fireball, look up monster information, look up information about class stuff. I can do all of that. I can look up the Dungeon Master's Guide, and I have a whole list of all the Dungeon Master's Guide stuff in here. If I want to look up stuff about bastions, I can click in here and I get a view about how to have bastions and everything like that. Creating bastions, bastion turns, all that sort of stuff. So it treats it like my local version, my local digital version of 5e. What I kind of want is to have a local version of D&D Beyond, right? What I really want is a self-contained, self-installed version of D&D Beyond that is mine, that I know can last longer than whatever Wizards decides to do with D&D Beyond. And I can always have that. And I'm pretty close to that. But I'm also kind of fitting a square peg into a round hole a little bit, because this is really a virtual tabletop. It is not meant to be a compendium. So examples are, I can kind of look up monsters. Like I can go to the SRD, let's see, look at my compendium browser, and I can go to monsters, and I can type like Balor. But when I get the Balor stuff, what I'm really getting is sort of a character sheet of the Balor. And it tells me a lot about them, right? Like I can go and I can look, I can say, oh, it's got a multi-attack. What's its multi-attack? Makes 2 attacks, one with its longsword, one with its whip. It doesn't have like the other information about the average damage or anything like that. But of course I can click it right from here. This is really meant to be an interactive character sheet, not just a display for the compendium. I am curious what the monster manual, the 2024 monster manual will look like in here. And maybe in a similar way to the Dungeon Master's Guide, I can kind of look up anything that I want in that list and then load it up. So for example, let's see what the monsters look like. If I go here, let's go to my compendium browser, and we will go to, I guess, let's see, probably the easier way is go down here, and they have an actors. Oh, look, we got example characters. That's interesting. They have some level 1 characters already pre-built. Neat. I didn't know they had that. Let's go for my wolf. There's a lot of creatures in here. Let's go for a skeleton. Good old skeleton. So it has a way to kind of like look things up and view them, but it doesn't quite show them in sort of the normal compendium view I would expect from like an online tool. But of course, I'll have the physical book too. So if I just want to read a monster, I can just look at the book and read the monster. But if I want to look things up online, I have a way to open it up and check it out inside this template. So I think that's really powerful. I really like this idea. I like the idea that I have the whole thing. And then the other interesting thing is because it's in Foundry, I can back it up. I can kind of install all the mods that I want, install all the sources I want, and save it and back it up. And then I have a backup locally stored of the instance of Foundry with all of that information in it that is always mine. And in theory, if I take care of that backup, and if the software is able to continue to load that backup in and sort of rebuild from that backup, I have my own copy regardless of what anybody else in the world is doing with anything else. The whole internet could be down and I can still run it because it's all running on my internal local network anyway. So as long as I have electricity, I can keep my own local network up there. Now there's a price beyond the monetary costs. Obviously, this stuff costs money. Foundry is $60, I think, and then you're paying $60 for the Dungeon Master's Guide to the Player's Handbook. You're already $120. You're $180 as soon as you put in the monster manual in there. But once you paid it, you own it, and it's yours forever, right? You're not renting it every month. One of the tricks with it, though, is added complexity. One of the things I've noticed about self-hosting things in general is added complexity. And building a character inside Foundry is not as easy as the wizard of building characters inside D&D Beyond. There is a cost for decentralization, right? That there is a cost for the complexity of the software, especially when you're talking about third-party modules that people have created for Foundry. Sometimes they work well and sometimes they don't. Sometimes they're pretty glitchy and weird. Sometimes you have them where they offer some abilities, but they expect you to pay for a regular Patreon to have other abilities. And that's not really, now you're back to centralization again, right? You have to hope that they're going to keep their thing up in order for whatever it is that you're using to work. So there's costs. And I think like for a lot of people, that cost is not worth it, right? For a lot of people, I think they're going to say, hey, this looks like a pain in, setting up a Raspberry Pi in your home and then installing Foundry and Docker on Linux and then, having all this, that's way more than I want to do. I want to just have an online character builder. Sure. And then you can go to D&D Beyond and you can, buy the books over there and you can subscribe to their service and you get a nice user-friendly system for using D&D Beyond. You can do the same thing on Roll20, right? Roll20 is also a centralized service. They're working on a character builder for D&D 2024. So you can use them as well. And in theory, all of these things should be working towards making them easier to use and working well on mobile and everything like that. And you're just not going to get that with like self-hosted solutions where they're very technical and they require a lot of extra work. So there's a balance there. And I recognize the balance. I'm not saying like, oh, everybody should leave D&D Beyond completely and that's a total dead solution. Never use it and instead use Foundry. What I am saying is if it matters to you that you own the content versus you're renting the content, and if you find self-hosting to be valuable, if you want to have something where you can load all of the tools up that you need in order to run a game for a digital version of the game in your house without having to worry about your internet connectivity, this is a pretty good solution for it. It is a solution where you can buy, download, and back up the data. If that matters to you, and the cost is, it's hard to do, right? It has some extra work in there, but I'm fascinated by it. There's one module I wanted to point out in particular that I kind of dug, and that module is called Mobile Improvements. Mobile Improvements is an add-on module for Foundry. It is free to load, and it essentially makes Foundry work well on touchscreen devices like tablets and phones. And using Mobile Improvements, I was able to kind of set up my own internal version of Foundry and load the D&D 2024 Player's Handbook and Dungeon Master's Guide, and then load the compendiums up and load up information on my phone. So I could look up spells from it, I could look up character abilities from it, theoretically I could look up monsters from it, and they formatted well to my phone. They used touchscreen stuff, they formatted well so it looked right. Sometimes it's a little glitchy, sometimes you get like a lot of stacked layers of stuff that doesn't look quite right. I think it would work better on a tablet than it works on a phone, but it absolutely worked. And that was a neat module as well. When I'm leaning towards this ideal version of a downloadable D&D Beyond, this one got me one step closer. It's still quite a far cry from the ease of use of D&D Beyond, especially web-based versions of D&D Beyond. There's the whole idea of being able to reach your own Foundry server through your own network. That's something I'm exploring next, is what kind of setup do I need in order to be able to reach this anywhere instead of just while I'm at home. That's a whole other topic and could, lead you towards terrible security where hackers are inside your network sniffing all your Amazon Alexa devices or whatever. So, something that you got to, again, that's the technology aspect, right? There is a cost. There is a cost for that. And the cost is that you've got to learn all of this stuff. So there's further experimentation, constant further experimentation. If you don't want the hassle of self-hosting Foundry, there is a thing called the Forge, which is a place where you can give them your license and you pay a monthly fee and they host your version of Foundry for you. That's pretty good too. It's still a centralized service. Now you're counting on the Forge, but you can back up and download your copy of Foundry. So even if the Forge goes down, you still have your copy of the software and all the modules and all the other things that you bought are still yours, which is different than, say, Roll20, where Roll20 can do whatever they want to do, and whatever happens to them, all of your software goes with them, not with you. So, conversation to be continued, right? We're not done with this whole thing. I'm still kind of figuring out, and this only gets into just using it with D&D 2024. It also has Tales of the Valiant. It also has Level Up Advanced 5e. It also has the original 2014 D&D. It even has the SRD, so you can run D&D 2014 and 2024 games using the free versions of the SRD. There isn't yet an SRD for D&D 2024, but it looks like they still have the free D&D 2024 stuff up on Foundry. So that's playable too. And many other games. Shadow Dark plays on there. Folks in chat here are talking about Pathfinder 2e uses really good support for Pathfinder 2e. Savage Worlds. So Foundry is a great system for lots of role-playing games where you can install those systems, download the software, and you own it. So really cool. So I'm bullish on Foundry. I think it is a really good platform. I like it a lot. It definitely has a high learning curve. It's not for everybody. It's not easy to maintain. It's not easy to get up and running and installing. But it is a very cool virtual tabletop that does something most virtual. I think the only other one that even comes close is Fantasy Grounds, in a downloadable, backupable, transferable, locally owned version of your entire electronic tabletop role-playing suite. And I thought that was pretty neat. There is a quest model that was first introduced to me through the adventure Dragon of Icespire Peak in the D&D Essentials kit. And I have used this quest model a lot in stuff that I have published. I have used it a lot in my own games, and I think it is a really useful quest model. There's lots of these sort of different models that we can use for our games. There are quest models in the sense of the 3 of 5 keys quest model, where you have characters that are seeking a number of keys in order to do a thing. It's better to require 3 of 5 keys than it is to require all 5 keys, because if you require all 5 keys, one of them can be thrown into the void and now the whole game is over. That's a fragile quest model unless you do the 3 of 5 keys, where now you have different groups that are finding different ones. I use that extensively in City of Arches. I've used it in other campaigns as well. Another quest model, and this is a different style of quest model, is how to keep interesting choices in front of the players without overwhelming them and without making sure that their quest log does not get too big. And still make sure that the work that you're doing to prep the various quests is generally not wasted, that you're wasting as little as possible. And I'm going to call it, I'm giving it this name, the 3-2-1 quest model. And the way the 3-2-1 quest model works is you put 3 quests in front of the characters, however you're putting it in front of me. Their patron could offer it to them. They could pick them up around town. They could go to a job board. In Dragon of Icespire Peak, they literally have a job board, and over on the job board are 3 quests. They pick one of those quests. They go on the quest. They complete the quest. Then they come back and they look, and the remaining 2 quests are still there. They pick one of those quests. They go on that quest. And when they come back, there are now 3 new quests. That third one is thrown away. So there are 3 quests. Then there are 2 quests. The last quest is thrown away. And then there are 3 new quests. And you can continue to iterate through this style of 3 quests, then 2 quests, throw out the final quest, then 3 quests, then 2 quests, then throw out the final quest. You can do that as long as you want through a whole vast network of an entire campaign if you want. Dragon of Icespire Peak does it many different ways, many different times, until you're eventually, I think, are at 6th or 7th level by the time you end. This model works really well for a few reasons. It always gives the players a choice of 2 or 3 different quests that they can go on. Right? They always have a choice about what one they want to do. They never get into this state where there's only one left and they have to do it, and now they feel railroaded because it's like, well, we didn't want it. They also have a way to get rid of quests that they did not choose. So if they've gone on 2 other quests, leaving the third quest to decay, it can decay and go away, and the quest is done. It wastes little of your prep, since out of the 3 quests that you did, 2 of them are going to be completed. So you're only throwing away one of the quests, and probably you didn't, on the assumption you didn't build out the entire adventure for that quest, you're still managing to keep 2 out of 3 of the quests that you're putting out there. You still get to keep, and you know that you're going to run. And you're not overwhelming the player with too many quests. If you try to keep them all and you're adding new quests, eventually they're going to get more quests than they can ever complete, because you're always going to have more quests on the list than they can finish. This makes sure that you have a consistent number of quests that are showing up in front of your players every time that isn't overwhelming. But it's not perfect. This model isn't perfect, and there are a few things that you can do to try to make sure that this model works well. Number 1 is tell your players how this quest model works. Before they ever pick their first quest, tell them the way this is going, and you could just tell them. You don't have to come up with some kind of crazy in-game reason. You can just say to them, this is a game we're playing, and much in the same way we describe how difficulty classes work, we can also describe how the quest model works. And what we can say is that the way this quest model is going to work is you're going to have 3 quests. You get to pick one and go on it. Then you come back and you pick one of the remaining 2, and then the third will be thrown away. So keep that in mind when you're looking at the quest to decide which ones you want to go on, and probably which one you're not going to want to go on. And you don't have to choose right now. You'll choose at the end. That way, they know how the quest is going to work, and that way they might better determine which quests they're going to go on, because they know that one of those quests they're not going to go on. 2 is don't make them feel bad for not picking that last quest. If the quest is required for the story, if you decide, oh, we need to have all these quests done, then go ahead and have all of them done and have that quest not disappear. Right? You don't have to have every quest disappear, but you don't want to say, oh, because you didn't pick this quest, you guys got screwed with this thing. Right? Don't make the penalty for not choosing one of the quests so bad that they feel they're damned if they do and they damned if they don't. I ran a campaign like this where I sort of had 3 different things that were going on, and the players were always picking one of the arcs. In that case, it was even worse, because whatever arc they picked, the other 2 fronts were moving forward, and they realized they were always getting hosed. You can have things move forward if they don't pick a particular quest. Just don't make them feel bad for doing it. It's okay to have the world move on because they didn't choose a quest, but don't make it feel like they made the wrong choice, right? Because you gave them the option. There shouldn't be a wrong choice. And then 3 is don't hang on too tightly. That you don't have to have this perfect iteration of 3 quests and 2 quests and throw the third out, 3 quests and 2 quests and throw the third out. You don't have to hit that every single time. It's okay to have some quests that linger around. It's okay to remove a quest early if the circumstances do it. The world and the situation in the world can generally determine whether or not quests stay on the list or quests go. An easy way is to say another group accomplished the thing that you didn't do. If you're in this kind of like hiring quests to go on, or hiring adventures to go on quests, an easy way to get rid of the quest is to say somebody else already took care of that, or now that situation has already been resolved. If it's important that the characters did one of those quests, you can clarify that to them and then keep it on the list and say that one still exists. But otherwise, you could say, no, that quest fell off the list, and that's okay. This can be rough for completionists, that there are certain players who feel like they have to hit every single edge of everything that's ever put out. That's why it's worth a conversation up front to explain not every quest is going to continue to be available, and that's okay. The game is going to move on. I'm not going to punish you for not picking a particular quest. It's not going to lead you down some dark path because you didn't pick the third one. The intention is that you have meaningful choices in front of you, and having meaningful choice to let go of some ideas because you don't really want to do them. The other thing is, because you have players who are choosing together, you want to make sure the players are all good with the choices that are getting made. And you don't want to necessarily, if you have one player who's like, man, I really wanted to go on that third quest, and the player's like, yeah, that would have been okay, but we like these other ones, then maybe you keep that one around so that that player has an opportunity to do that quest, right? But sometimes what you really want to look for is ones where none of the players are particularly interested in a quest, or they really don't care that it disappears, right? So keep in mind the emotions of your players as they're determining what quest they want to go on. Are you taking something away from them they really wanted to do? Then maybe keep that one on the list and then just add 2 more until finally they do that one quest, right? So there are ways to manipulate this 3-2-1 quest model in order to support like the drives of all of the players but also keep some flexibility in it so you can move some things around, but also give you a quest model that is a really fun, easy to use quest model that doesn't waste a lot of your energy for preparation and make sure that the characters don't get overwhelmed with too many options over the course of their adventure. So I really like this idea, the 3-2-1 quest model, and I wanted to recommend it. So hopefully you find that useful. Every month on the Sly Flourish Patreon, we have a Patreon Q&A starting in 2025. I can't believe it's 2025 in like 3 days. In 2025, we're going to switch to quarterly. So we're going to have quarterly Q&As. I'm still going to answer every question that shows up. I'm going to answer them every Friday, but I'm only going to be breaking them up instead of monthly. I'm going to be breaking them out by quarter over the next 4 quarters of 2025. So it will become, instead of the Sly Flourish monthly Q&A, it will be the Sly Flourish quarterly Q&A. Helps me better manage the flow of questions that comes in. Makes my life a little bit easier. But otherwise, I don't think things are going to change. Our first question comes from Sam P., who says, how do you prepare your brain for the physical strain of DMing? My brain always feels like it's been smashed and put through a blender at the end of a session, and I feel I need to spend the rest of the day silently sitting in the dark room to recharge. Okay, that's a bit of an exaggeration, but you get the idea. It sucks. Is this DM hangover just an inevitable side effect from 5 hours of improv? Even for more casual sessions, I feel exhausted afterwards. It's interesting. I have heard from different DMs that feel different ways when they finish a session. Some people feel invigorated. And I've heard this is true with social situations in general, that some people go to a social situation and they're talking to lots of people and they're meeting lots of people and they're doing lots of stuff. And when they leave, they feel great. They feel more energized by all of the conversations that they've had with people. And other folks go to such situations like that and they feel completely drained and they need to sit in a dark room and just have silence. I don't know if this is an introvert extrovert thing. I'm not a psychologist, and you should not treat me as though I am one, or treat anything I say as though it has any actual bearing on any of this kind of stuff. But it wouldn't surprise me if this is kind of a different way that people operate in sort of side of social situations. I don't think I feel either way. I do know that I feel good when my game is done. I feel happy about the game I've run. I've enjoyed it. There's part of me, this is a weird one, that I'm kind of glad it's over, right? I finished it and I'm done and I'm happy and now I get to relax. So it's a little bit of like going to the dark room. Like when I'm done with my day, I know I can just go sit and veg and read a book or play a video game or do whatever, so I don't think I'm on the side of like, I feel like I have even more energy. I definitely feel good when I've run a game. Most of the games I come out of, I feel great. And I've definitely felt really good of games that just went really, really well. But what can you do about this, right? And what are some things to consider with this? Well, one is you might look at that. You might kind of dive in and do a little bit of online research. I know, do your own research is a little scary. But see if there are kind of techniques for what's, how do you feel after you've been in a social situation? Are there things you can do? And maybe just recharging is okay, right? Maybe it's okay. Like, I mean, it depends. Like if you really feel bad, that's something to dive into. But if it's really like, I feel weird that I need the time to sit in a dark room and recharge, maybe that's okay. Right? Like I feel like that. I feel like we need time to just kind of veg and not be involved. I know that like for me, running 3 games a week is too many, right? That when I run 2 to 3 games a week, I run an every other week game. And in the weeks where I run 3 games, I feel like I'm on all the time. And usually I feel like I don't get any real time off because I'm doing a bunch of other stuff too. That's about as much as I can do. And there are some times where I'm running that 3 games a week for multiple weeks in a row because of other circumstances. And that's really hard for me. That's more games than I can handle. And I usually, at that point, I definitely need the like time in a closet, in a dark room, not doing anything. One thing is you said 5 hours of improv. One option, something to consider is what about smaller sessions? What about shorter sessions? I think I would have a hard time with 5. I have a hard time with 4-hour games, right? I have a hard time playing in 4-hour games. I have a hard time running 4-hour games. 3 hours is my sweet spot. 3 hours feels like I get a lot done. I feel like we can move a lot in the story. It's easier for me to prep because I don't need that much stuff. So I really love 3-hour games. So you might think about, I don't know if this is an option, but one thing to potentially consider is lowering the number of hours of your game. See if you can shorten them up. Even if you have them more frequently, like it depends on if you're doing it every week or not. If you can do it more frequently for fewer hours, you might not burn yourself out quite so much. 5 hours of anything is hard, right? Like imagine 5 hours of any activity is pretty grueling. So walking away from 5 hours feeling like you're wiped out, I think if you're doing 5 hours of anything straight, you'd probably be wiped out. So for me, like most people play 4-hour games. I've done some research on this, and most of the people that have responded to the research I did said that they ran 4-hour games, and that seems to be the standard. But there's a lot to be said for 3-hour games, and even if possible 2-hour games. Shorter, more frequent 2-hour games are not an impossibility as well. That's probably what I would recommend, is see if there's a way for you to do that. Or maybe in that 5-hour game, taking an hour in the middle for a meal break or something else where you can kind of chill out a little bit. And instead of running a solid 5 hours, breaks are important. I take a 10-minute break every hour and a half, and I find them to be pretty vital for me to stay on. So hopefully that gives you a couple of options. Again, recognizing I am no expert in any of this. Gerald W. says, I do my best to prep my campaigns as you do with Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master, making secrets. I am wondering, is there a balance to be found in the types of secrets? World, NPC, plot, PC-specific, environmental, and historical secrets. Is there a change to make the world too heavy? Is there a change to make the world too heavy? Should I foreshadow a bit or a lot? You should do what feels right. No, there is not a perfect balance, and I wouldn't try to hang on too tightly to a perfect balance. Remember, the 8 steps themselves of Return are a loose framework for prep, and each of those steps are loose in the kind of stuff you can put in there. I've talked about scenes, for example. Scenes being a really flexible area of your game that does not need a lot of work. You can put a lot of different things in your scenes that might not be the same from one session to another. I would say the same is true with secrets, that it's when you're having trouble coming up with 10 secrets, looking through those categories that you mentioned of PC specific, environmental, historical, world, NPC, plot. It's kind of fun and kind of useful to go through this and think, are there any secrets that I can drop in that matter for this? But you don't have to worry about balancing them. The main thing is this something that could be valuable in the next session is probably valuable. If you're putting a lot of stuff in there where you really don't know if it matters, that could be a problem. But instead, if you're focused on making sure you have secrets that are useful, it kind of doesn't matter what category you bring them from. Should you foreshadow a little or about, honestly, that's going to matter more for your campaign and you and your style and what you want to do. But don't hang on to it too much, and don't presume that there's a right way to do it. The right way is the one that helps you at your own table. That's the right way. There isn't a preferred method for any of these things, other than a few kind of big, I would still say they're guidelines, but the idea of 10 secrets, I think, is a pretty useful guideline. And it's because I've definitely seen it where if you have too few secrets, you're going to run out. You're not going to have enough. And if you have too many, you get overwhelmed with them. So there's some good sort of median level things. Will it kill you if you did 8? No. Will it kill you if you did 12? No. 3? Probably not enough. 25? Probably too many. So, but generally speaking, all of these steps are designed to be kind of loose things that you can use that help you in your game. So you asking me is not as useful as you asking yourself. How much do you want to foreshadow? And how useful is it for you to have a couple of secrets for one of these categories? Just don't hang on to them too tightly. And instead, remember that secrets serve you. Number one point of all this, secrets serve you. They're there to help you, not the other way around. You're not helping the secrets are helping you. So if it's helping you, it's working. If it's not helping you, it's not. Christopher W. says, I recently watched your 2024 toolkit video and gained many ideas from it. When it comes to games with several core books, like D&D or Tales of the Valiant, do you bring all the core books if you're traveling? If you're using an adventure book such as Curse of Strahd, do you bring that book as well? Setting books? To narrow all this down to one question, how do you decide which books to bring if you are traveling by car to someone else's house? Yeah, so I bring the books I need. I know that's not useful either. Lately, for Tales of the Valiant, I bought the pocket versions of the Tales of the Valiant Player's Guide and the Monster Vault, and I bring those with me. I did bring the Game Master's Guide with me, but I haven't really used it, so I've stopped bringing that to the table. But I do find that the Monster Vault is one that I want. The Player's Guide is one that I want. Recently, I did not bring the Midgard World book, and I really wished I had. The World book is a giant, beefy tome. It's like a 500-page book, and it's a great big hardcover book. So I've not been bringing that. Actually, the friend that I go and run my game at, he actually has one. So if I need him, I can ask. So you bring the books you need. I would probably bring the adventure book if you're running a published adventure. I think that makes sense. If you're running in a specific campaign world, I think it could be useful to have that campaign source book with you. One thing I would really recommend, and I actually did this for my Tales of the Valiant book, and I did it for my 2024 Dungeon Master's Guide, little adhesive tabs are super useful. And you can put adhesive tabs in the books that you commonly use, in the sections that you commonly use, so that it's way faster and way easier to reference at the table. I keep a bunch of blank tabs in a monster book so that whenever I'm using particular monsters, I can quickly like turn the tab and put it at the monster, and that way it's very fast for me to flip through. Tiny little adhesive tabs. I bought like 500 of them for $6, and they're replaceable and reusable. You can write on some of them if they're going to stay in place. My Tales of Valiant Player's Guide, I put a bunch of tabs in for a bunch of different sections of that book. For my monster book, I just keep a bunch of blanks because I don't know which monster I'm going to highlight at any given time. But once I've selected a monster, then I'll tab that monster, and that way it's really easy for me to flip from one monster to the other. So I think using tabs is a little side tip I'm going to offer, but I think that the big question is like the books you need. And yeah, so the books the books I tend to bring or should bring are probably a player's guide so that I can look up spells and stuff like that, a monster guide so I have the monsters that I want, and probably either the setting source book if I'm running in a particular setting. If I was running an Eberron, I bring my Eberron book. Midgard, I bring my Midgard book. And if I was running a published adventure, I'd certainly bring the published adventure. Friends, I want to thank all of you for hanging out with me today while we talked about all things in tabletop role-playing games. If you like this show and you want to see more stuff like this, the best thing you can do is subscribe to the Sly Flourish newsletter. Link is down in the show notes. It is absolutely free to sign up. You get a free adventure generator PDF that includes a micro version of 5e that you can run with your friends and family at any event. You will also get an RPG related article sent to your inbox every week. You can also support me directly on Patreon. Patrons get access to all kinds of tips, tricks, tools, source books, adventures, scenarios, all kinds of things to help you run your games. And you get access to the Lazy RPG, our Lazy GM channel over on Discord. And you help me put on shows like this. And of course, you can pick up any of my books, including Return to the Lazy Dungeon Master, Lazy DM's Workbook, Lazy DM's Companion, City of Arches, Forge of Foes, and others at the Sly Flourish Bookstore. You can find links for that in the show notes. Thank you so much. Have a great day, and get out there and play an RPG.